welcome to another English Sparkling with Tweedy, and for once, after that slew of still English wine videos, actually some sparkling wine again. Although it is a wine I have featured before, I've just taken delivery of 3 bottles from Wiston, and there were only really 2 that I was particularly interested in, but for some reason it seemed a bit daft just ordering 2, and maybe ordering the 3rd got me over the threshold where you get free delivery or something, but whatever. I put in an extra bottle, which is their sort of mainstay, their standard offering, Wiston Brut Envy, the non-vintage classic cuvee, I suppose, for want of a better word. If I recall correctly, the grape breakdown for this is roughly a third-ish of each of the classic champagne varieties, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier and Chardonnay. They're in equal quantities, so it has an unusually high amount of Pinot Meunier, which is normally, if present at all, in very small quantities in most traditional method sparkling wines, particularly English sparkling. So it's, I suppose, overall then Pinot dominant. It's 70%, 70-something percent Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, and the rest Chardonnay. It is an NV, and unlike some other producers, there isn't a kind of nice code on the back or anything like that, so you can go and look up the specific blend of grapes and vintages and all that. It does have a disgorgement date. Is that something like April 2025, about 5 months ago, the 20-something of April. The text is a bit smudged, can't read it very well. And it has the dosage there as 7 grams a litre. When I looked up the page on their website for this wine, I think that the information they gave there, a little bit of more technical information, but it's sort of general. It doesn't apply to this particular bottle. And I suspect that's an earlier release of this, because they talk about that having 8 grams a litre dosage. So working backwards, they say this is normally 3 to 5 years on the lees, and it's about 9 months from harvesting the grapes to when it's first bottled. And if this was disgorged in April of this year, I would guess this is based on maybe a 2020 vintage or a 2021 vintage. And then they say they use something like 30% of reserve wines. And I think at the time this was made, at least the first part of the winemaking process would have been carried out, I believe, by Dermot Segru, who was there up until, was it roughly the harvest or the summer of 2022, before Marcus Rayner Ward took over. So disgorgement would have been overseen by Marcus Rayner Ward and team, but the original still wine making parts would have been done by Dermot Segru. Nice sort of pale gold colour there, nice stream of fine bubbles. Another thing I couldn't quite pin down is whether or not this undergoes malolactic fermentation, so perhaps we'll try and guess that. I think normally as a sort of house style overall, Wiston tends to sort of shy away from that. They tend to be quite bold, bracing wines with a fair amount of malic acid, and that's certainly a thing that is a calling card of Dermot Segru's wine. Of course, it's no longer Dermot Segru doing the winemaking, but this vintage was for the first part. The first nose there, before giving it a swirl, I think I'm actually getting a bit more stone fruit. A lot of the other tasting notes really focus on apples and lemons. I get a sort of peachy kind of note to begin with. And that shouldn't be a surprise for something that is 70-something percent of the 2 Pinots. Tiny hint of something like brown sugar as well. Nice. Maybe apricot, peachy, apricot-y, something stone fruity like that. Not immediately noticing the apples and lemons so much. After a swirl, yeah, I think still more stone fruit. Maybe a little bit of orchard fruit started to creep in now as well. Something slightly appley. And if there is any lemons, it's perhaps those preserved lemons, the lemons that are in slices in jars. I mean, are they in brine or something? Something like that sort of smell rather than fresh lemon. A slightly briny quality. I don't know how you can smell brine. A pickled quality to it, perhaps I should say. That's something you can smell, isn't it? Pickles. Maybe some subtle autolytic character, something bready there as well. But that is quite a nice nose, and I like that I'm seemingly getting quite a lot of stone fruit out of that. On the palate, nice and crisp, nice and mineral. I'm noticing quite a mineral quality to that as well. I suppose I do get a sensation of a relatively low dosage, 7 grams, that's towards the bottom end of the Brut range, which is 6 to 12 grams, isn't it? Anything below 6, and I think we're into extra Brut territory. So it is, you know, relatively dry on the palate, and that helps those sort of mineral notes to come about. It's not searingly acidic, so I wonder if there might have been a bit, at least, of malolactic fermentation. I don't think it's an all or nothing process, malolactic fermentation. I think you can do it sort of partially. And that, as I've probably said many times before, will convert the malic acid into lactic acid, take some of that searing green apple zing and turns it into a creamy lactic acid character. So it is crisp, it is fresh, it is nice and mineral, but it's not overwhelmingly zingy, which makes me think perhaps a bit of malolactic went on here. Do I notice anything creamy or buttery, which is usually the output of that process? I don't know, I'm still thinking more about stone fruit here. It has a nice kind of mouth-watering, again, sort of peachy kind of quality, and there probably is some apple components to that as well, some orchard fruit. But I seem to be noticing the stone and the orchard fruit much more here, both on the nose and on the palate, than citrus, for example. Yeah, perhaps some apple there now, tasting it more than smelling it, but that's nice. It's quite elegant, it's crisp. Nice that the Pinot character is really showing itself. Sometimes you get a high percentage of Pinot and then it's all apples and lemons and you think, well, why did you bother? That's Chardonnay character to me. But here I think we're definitely getting quite a lot of Pinot input, and perhaps more than I remember from previous editions. This Wiston classic cuvee, the Brut NV, their standard release. So maybe from the earlier vintages. I know this is non-vintage, but you know, the earlier vintages that the non-vintage is based on, if that makes sense. Perhaps from some of the earlier iterations of that, there was a bit more Chardonnay character. Good. Well, I don't know if I have much more to say about that. It's just nice. I'm looking forward to the next couple of wines from Wiston. I have a Blanc de Noir, my favourite, I think, style overall of English sparkling, a Blanc de Noir, love those. And also a 2009 vintage, which was their very first release. So quite keen to try those, but I thought for the inaugural bottle of this particular round, I'd just go with the standard thing to refresh my memory of the house style and all that kind of stuff. I'll shut up, I think. Cheers.